Dr. Maya Johnson stood on the sidewalk, gazing up at the two-story colonial house that would soon be her home. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn of 723 Maple Avenue in the prestigious Elmwood neighborhood. She took a deep breath, savoring the sweet scent of nearby flowering trees. After months of house hunting and weeks of paperwork, this moment felt surreal. "This is really happening," she whispered to herself, clutching the new house keys in her hand. The moving truck rumbled around the corner, breaking the peaceful quiet of the upscale suburban street. Maya waved at the driver, pointing toward her driveway. She had deliberately chosen today, a Tuesday, hoping most neighbors would be at work. As the first black female mayor of Oak Ridge, Maya valued her privacy. The election had thrust her into the spotlight, and while she embraced her public role with determination and grace, she wanted her home to be a sanctuary. She wore faded jeans, a plain navy t-shirt, and her old college sweatshirt tied around her waist, comfortable clothes for a day of unpacking and arranging furniture. Her curly hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, face free of makeup. Today, she wasn't Mayor Johnson. She was just Maya, a 38-year-old woman excited about her new home. "Where do you want us to start, ma'am?" asked the lead mover, a stocky man with kind eyes named Pete. "Let's get the bigger furniture pieces in first," Maya replied. "I'll help direct where everything goes." As the movers began unloading, Maya noticed curtains shifting in the house across the street. A face appeared briefly before disappearing again. She smiled and waved, but whoever was watching didn't reciprocate. Maya shrugged it off. She'd meet her neighbors properly once she was settled in. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Maya worked alongside the movers, helping carry smaller items and unpacking essentials. She had always been hands-on, a trait her parents had instilled in her growing up. Her father, a high school history teacher, and her mother, a nurse, had raised her to believe no job was beneath her, regardless of her achievements. "Need some help with that?" Pete asked as Maya struggled with a heavy box of books. "I've got it," she insisted, adjusting her grip. "These are my law books. Can't part with them even though most are available online now." "You're a lawyer?" Pete asked, holding the door open for her. Maya hesitated. This was the moment she usually had to decide how much to reveal. "I was. Criminal defense for almost 10 years before I moved into public service." She didn't mention her current role. Maya had learned that people behaved differently around her once they knew she was the mayor. Their conversations became less genuine, more guarded. Today she just wanted to be treated normally. Around noon, Maya ordered pizza for everyone. They sat on boxes in what would eventually be her dining room, eating and chatting about the neighborhood. "Elmwood's real nice," said one of the younger movers, wiping pizza grease from his hands. "My aunt cleans houses around here. Says the people are loaded but mostly decent." Maya nodded. Elmwood was indeed one of the wealthiest areas in Oak Ridge, known for its historic homes and tree-lined streets. It was also predominantly white, a fact that hadn't escaped her notice when house hunting. Of the 120 homes in the neighborhood, she suspected she might be one of very few black homeowners. Her decision to buy here hadn't been made lightly. Some of her friends had questioned why she wouldn't choose a more diverse neighborhood, suggesting her presence in Elmwood might seem like she was trying to prove something. But Maya had fallen in love with this particular house, its character, the large oak tree in the backyard, the sunny kitchen, and the built-in bookshelves in what would become her home office. She refused to limit her choices based on outdated neighborhood demographics. "You know what they say," she had told her skeptical friend Lisa over coffee last week. "Be the change you want to see." Lisa had rolled her eyes. "They also say don't be the test case, but you never listen to that one either." As the afternoon wore on, the moving truck gradually emptied. Maya directed the placement of her sofa, her grandmother's antique dining table, and her beloved piano. By 4 o'clock, the movers were preparing to leave. "That's the last of it, Dr. Johnson," Pete said, handing her the inventory list to sign. "Need help setting anything else up before we go?" "No, you all have been wonderful," Maya replied, adding a generous tip to their payment. "Thank you for making this day so much easier." After the truck pulled away, Maya stood alone in her new living room, surrounded by boxes and displaced furniture. The reality of the move suddenly hit her. The magnitude of change, the responsibility of home ownership, the isolation of being in a new neighborhood where she knew no one. For a moment, doubt crept in. Had she made the right choice? The mayoral election had been contentious. with some ugly moments that revealed the undercurrent of prejudice still present in parts of Oak Ridge. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. Reminder, budget meeting tomorrow. 9 a.m. Need anything before then? Maya sighed, typing back, all good. Moving in now. See you tomorrow. She walked through each room of her new house, mentally arranging furniture and planning where pictures would hang. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, warming the hardwood floors. Despite the chaos of moving boxes, the house already felt like home. In the kitchen, Maya unpacked enough to make a cup of tea. She leaned against the counter, cradling the warm mug in her hands, allowing herself a moment of pride. At 38, she had achieved what many thought impossible, becoming the youngest mayor in Oak Ridge's history and the first black woman to hold the office. Now she owned a beautiful home in a neighborhood that represented both the history and future of the city she served. A knock at the front door startled her from her thoughts. Setting down her tea, Maya navigated through the maze of boxes to answer it. Standing on her porch was an older woman with silver hair and a warm smile, holding a small potted plant. Behind her stood a tall man with glasses who Maya assumed was her husband. Hello there. I'm Dorothy Wilson from next door, and this is my husband, Howard. We wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood. Maya's face broke into a genuine smile as she opened the door wider. That's so kind of you. I'm Maya Johnson. Please come in, if you don't mind the mess. Oh, we wouldn't dream of imposing on moving day, Dorothy said, handing Maya the plant. It's a peace lily. They're supposed to bring good fortune to new homes. Thank you. This is lovely, Maya said, touched by the gesture. We've lived here 30 years, Howard added. If you need anything or have questions about the neighborhood, don't hesitate to ask. Actually, Maya ventured, could you recommend a good local handyman? I noticed the gutter on the east side needs fixing. The couple eagerly provided the name and number of someone they trusted, along with recommendations for local restaurants and the best day for trash pickup. They didn't ask what Maya did for a living, and she didn't volunteer the information. For these few minutes, she was simply their new neighbor, not the mayor. After the Wilsons left, promising to check in again once she was settled, Maya felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Their kindness had confirmed her hope that she could find genuine community here. As evening fell, Maya ordered takeout from one of the restaurants the Wilsons had recommended and ate sitting on the floor of her living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. She scrolled through emails on her phone, mentally preparing for tomorrow's budget meeting while making notes about unpacking priorities for the weekend. Her parents called to check how the move had gone. Everything okay? Her mother asked, concern evident in her voice. They worried about her living alone in Elmwood, though neither would say exactly why. Everything's fine, Mom. The house is perfect. My neighbors seem nice. I've got 1,000,000 boxes to unpack, but I'll get there. You always do, her father said with pride. Your mother and I can come help this weekend if you need us. I might take you up on that, Maya replied, knowing how much it would mean to them to be involved. After the call, Maya took a shower in her new bathroom, then made up her bed with fresh sheets. She stood at her bedroom window for a long moment, looking out at the quiet street. Porch lights glowed on nearly every home, stars twinkled above, and somewhere a dog barked. It all felt so normal, so peaceful. Tomorrow she would return to being Mayor Johnson, with all the responsibilities and scrutiny that came with the position. But tonight, in this house, she was just Maya, tired, hopeful, and finally home. She crawled into bed and fell asleep almost instantly, unaware of the curious eyes watching her house from across the street, or the whispered conversations taking place in nearby homes about the neighborhood's newest resident. For now, Maya slept soundly in her new beginning, dreaming of the life she would build here. One day at a time, 3 days after moving in, Maya woke to golden sunlight streaming through her bedroom windows. It was Saturday, and for the first time since becoming mayor 6 months ago, she had a full day to herself with no meetings, no speeches, and no ribbon-cutting ceremonies. She stretched lazily in bed, savoring the rare luxury of waking without an alarm. Garden day, she murmured to herself, glancing out the window at her new yard. The previous owners had maintained basic landscaping, but Maya envisioned more color, more life. She'd spent hours looking through gardening magazines, planning a small sanctuary that would welcome butterflies and birds. After a quick breakfast of toast and coffee, Maya changed into worn jeans, a faded university t-shirt, and her old gardening hat. She looked nothing like the polished, suit-wearing mayor who appeared at City Hall during the week. Today, she was just another homeowner ready to get her hands dirty. Maya loaded supplies into a wheelbarrow, bags of soil, colorful flats of flowers, solar-powered garden lights, and various tools. The neighborhood was quietly coming to life around her. A jogger waved as he passed. A woman walked her golden retriever on the opposite sidewalk. 2 houses down, an older man retrieved his newspaper from the driveway. None of them seemed to recognize her, and Maya felt a wave of relief. This was exactly what she needed. A chance to simply be herself without the weight of public office following her every move. She knelt in the front flower bed and began pulling weeds, humming softly. The morning air still carried a slight chill, but the physical work soon warmed her. Maya lost track of time as she dug small holes for new plants, carefully arranging purple coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, and lavender in a pattern that would bloom throughout the summer. Across the street, behind cream-colored curtains, Diane Whitfield peered out her living room window. She'd been watching the new neighbor's house on and off since the moving truck had arrived earlier that week. "Richard," she called to her husband, who was reading the newspaper in his recliner. "That woman is out in the yard again." Richard Whitfield lowered his paper with a sigh. "And people tend to be in their yards on weekends, Diane. But who is she?" "The real estate agent said the house sold to a doctor, but we haven't even seen a proper moving-in party or introduction." "It's not very neighborly." Richard joined his wife at the window. Across the street, the woman in question was placing solar lights along the garden edge, her back to them. Maybe she's just private. "Not everyone wants to throw a party the minute they move in?" Diane frowned. "The Hendersons always said this neighborhood has traditions. When we moved in last year, we sent cards to everyone on the block. It's just proper etiquette." "Times change," Richard said, returning to his chair. "Besides, Dorothy and Howard went over there. They said she was perfectly nice." "Dorothy would say that about anyone," Diane muttered. She continued watching as the woman stood up, brushed dirt from her knees, and walked around to the side of the house, disappearing from view. Diane's phone buzzed with a message from the neighborhood watch group. "Monthly reminder, report any suspicious activity. Better safe than sorry." She stared at the message, then back at the house across the street. The woman had seemed to be planting something along the side of the house now, partly hidden from street view. Wasn't it odd to work on an area that wasn't even visible to passersby? And she'd been wearing that hat pulled low, almost as if... "Richard," Diane said slowly. "What if she's not the homeowner at all?" Richard looked up again. "What are you talking about?" "Think about it. We've never seen any moving trucks unload furniture. Just a few boxes. What if she's just pretending to live there? Or what if she's casing the neighborhood?" "Diane, that's ridiculous." "We saw the moving truck. Dorothy met her. Dorothy meets everyone. She probably just assumed this woman belonged there." Diane's imagination was racing now. There have been break-ins 3 neighborhoods over. The community alert just last week warned about burglars posing as service workers. Richard sighed. "So you think a burglar is spending 3 days planting flowers as cover for a future crime spree?" When he put it that way, it did sound somewhat far-fetched. But Diane couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The woman didn't look like she belonged in Elmwood, though Diane would never say that out loud. It wasn't about race, she told herself. It was about presentation, about fitting in. The residents of Elmwood had a certain look, a certain way of carrying themselves. This woman in her old clothes and gardening hat just didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. "I'm going to call Carl," Diane said, referring to their neighborhood watch captain, "just to be safe." "Don't bother Carl on a Saturday," Richard said. But Diane was already dialing. Carl didn't answer. So Diane left a detailed message describing the suspicious person who had been hanging around the vacant house for several days. After hanging up, she felt a mixture of civic duty and unease. What if she was wrong? "I think I'll just call the non-emergency police line," she decided aloud. "They can just drive by and check. No harm in that." Richard lowered his newspaper again. "Diane, please don't..." But she was already speaking to the dispatcher, describing a woman who doesn't appear to belong working around the property at 723 Maple Avenue. "Can you describe her?" The dispatcher asked. "African-American, maybe late 30s, wearing jeans and a blue t-shirt. She has some tools and is digging around the property." "And you're certain she doesn't live there?" "Well, no one's officially moved in as far as we know." Diane said, fudging the truth slightly. The house was sold recently. We'll send someone to check it out, the dispatcher said. Diane hung up, feeling satisfied that she'd done her duty to keep the neighborhood safe. Richard, however, was less pleased. That was completely unnecessary, he said, and frankly embarrassing. Better safe than sorry, Diane repeated the neighborhood watch motto. If she's the legitimate homeowner, she'll have ID and everything will be fine. If not, well, we might have prevented a crime. Outside, Maya was blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding across the street. She had moved to the side garden to plant shade-loving hostas and ferns under the large oak tree. The physical work was therapeutic after weeks of intense budget negotiations at City Hall. Here, the only decisions she needed to make involved flower placement and mulch depth. She was just standing back to admire her work when she heard the distinct sound of a car with a heavy engine pulling up to the curb. Maya turned, expecting to see one of her neighbors, and instead found herself facing two police cruisers. Her heart sank as two officers stepped out, hands resting near their holsters. "Afternoon, ma'am," the taller officer said, his voice professionally neutral. "We received a call about someone suspicious working around this property." Maya blinked, momentarily confused. Then understanding dawned, bringing with it a familiar weight in her chest, a heaviness she'd felt many times before in similar situations. "I live here," she said calmly, though her heart was now racing. "I'm the homeowner." The officers exchanged glances. "Do you have any identification that shows this address, ma'am?" "I just moved in on Tuesday, so my ID still has my old address," Maya explained, working to keep her voice steady. "But I have the closing paperwork inside. I'd be happy to show you." "We'll need to see some form of identification," the second officer said, a younger man with close-cropped hair and a watchful gaze. Maya nodded. "Of course. Let me just wash my hands inside and get my wallet." "I'll come with you, ma'am," the first officer said. Maya felt a flare of indignation but tamped it down. This wasn't the time to assert her rights or position. She simply nodded and led the way to her front door, acutely aware of the officer following close behind, and the neighbors who had emerged onto porches and driveways to watch the scene unfold. From across the street, Diane and Richard Whitfield observed with growing unease. "They're going inside with her," Diane whispered. "Do you think she really lives there?" Richard didn't answer. A sinking feeling had settled in his stomach as he watched the woman calmly lead the police officer to her door. She didn't look afraid or guilty, just resigned, as if this sort of thing had happened before. Inside, Maya washed garden soil from her hands at the kitchen sink, then retrieved her purse from the counter. She pulled out her driver's license and handed it to the officer, along with a folder containing her closing documents. "Dr. Maya Johnson," the officer read aloud, looking from the license to her face. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Wait, are you—" "Yes," Maya said quietly. "I'm the mayor." The officer's posture changed immediately. His hand, which had been resting near his weapon, dropped to his side. "Mayor Johnson? We had no idea. Someone reported a suspicious person. They didn't mention that the suspicious person was me?" Maya finished for him, a sad smile touching her lips. "It's all right, officer." She glanced at his nameplate. "Reyes, you were just responding to a call." Officer Reyes looked deeply uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding. If we had known—" "But that's just it," Maya said gently. "You couldn't have known by looking at me. Not in my gardening clothes with dirt on my face." She gestured to her yard visible through the window. "I was just planting flowers on my day off." The younger officer had joined them in the kitchen, his face flushing red when he realized who they had confronted. "Mayor Johnson, we're very sorry for the intrusion." Maya nodded, accepting their apologies with grace she didn't entirely feel. As they walked back outside, she noticed a small crowd had gathered, curious neighbors watching from a distance. Among them, looking mortified, were Diane and Richard Whitfield. As the officers explained the situation to the onlookers, Maya saw Diane's hand fly to her mouth in shock. Richard placed a steadying hand on his wife's shoulder, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and regret. Maya took a deep breath and turned back to her garden. There would be time later to process what had happened, to consider the implications and decide how to respond. But for now she had flowers to plant and a life to build in her new home, regardless of who might be watching. A heavy silence hung in the air as Officer Reyes cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. The small crowd of neighbors had grown, whispers spreading from house to house. Maya stood beside her half-finished garden, soil still under her fingernails, her quiet dignity in stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around her. Again, "Mayor Johnson, we sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding," Officer Reyes said, loud enough for the onlookers to hear. His partner nodded vigorously beside him. Maya gave a small, tight smile. "No harm done, officers. You were just doing your job." But harm had been done. Maya could feel it in the weight that had settled in her chest, in the eyes of her new neighbors watching her every move. This wasn't the first time she'd been profiled, and she doubted it would be the last. But having it happen at her own home, a place that was supposed to be her sanctuary, cut deeper than she cared to admit. Across the street, Diane Whitfield's face had drained of color. "The mayor?" she whispered to her husband, her hand still covering her mouth. "I called the police on the mayor?" Richard looked equally shocked. "I told you not to make that call," he hissed back, though he'd done little to stop her. The officers were preparing to leave, speaking quietly into their radios. Maya could imagine the conversation back at the station later, how they'd almost arrested the city's first black female mayor for gardening in her own yard. In different circumstances, it might have been funny. Dorothy Wilson pushed through the small crowd, her husband Howard following close behind. "Maya, what on earth is happening? Are you all right?" The genuine concern in Dorothy's voice was a balm to Maya's frayed nerves. "I'm fine, Dorothy. Just a misunderstanding. Someone." She glanced briefly toward the Whitfield's house. "Thought I looked suspicious working in my garden and called the police." Dorothy's face fell. "Oh, Maya, I'm so sorry. That's awful." "These things happen," Maya said, though they both knew these things shouldn't happen. Not here, not anywhere. As the police cruisers pulled away, Maya became acutely aware of the audience still watching. Some neighbors looked embarrassed, others curious. A few seemed almost disappointed that the drama had ended without an arrest. Maya straightened her shoulders and turned back to her gardening supplies, determined not to let this incident drive her indoors. "Would you like some help with those flowers?" Dorothy asked, already kneeling to pick up a tray of petunias. "That would be wonderful," Maya replied, grateful for the simple kindness. Howard stepped forward too. "I'll get that wheelbarrow for you. Where would you like it?" As the Wilsons helped Maya continue her gardening, a few other neighbors drifted back to their homes. But the Whitfields remained frozen on their front porch, the magnitude of their mistake sinking in. "We should go apologize," Richard said, his voice low. Diane shook her head frantically. "Not now. Not with everyone watching. She probably hates us." "She's the mayor, Diane. She can make our lives very difficult if she chooses to." "All the more reason to wait until things calm down," Diane insisted. "Let's go inside." They retreated into their house, closing the door on the scene across the street, but unable to escape the consequences of what they'd set in motion. Maya worked with Dorothy and Howard for another hour, finishing the front garden. Their cheerful conversation helped distract her from the morning's events, but not entirely. Part of her mind was already spinning, thinking about how to address what had happened, not just for herself, but for her community. "You didn't tell us you were the mayor," Dorothy said as they planted the last of the flowers. Maya shrugged. "I wanted to be just Maya for a while, not Mayor Johnson." Howard nodded understandingly. "Can't say I blame you. Must be exhausting, always being in the public eye." "It has its challenges," Maya admitted, "but days like today remind me why the job matters." After the Wilsons left, promising to bring dinner later so she wouldn't have to cook, Maya finally allowed herself a moment alone. She sat on her front steps looking out at her newly planted garden and the quiet street beyond. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was fading, leaving behind a familiar ache. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was Lisa, her closest friend and unofficial advisor. "How's the new house?" Lisa asked when Maya answered. Maya hesitated, then sighed. "Well, I've already had the police called on me, so there's that." "You're kidding." Lisa's voice rose in disbelief. "What happened?" As Maya recounted the morning's events, she could almost see Lisa's expression changing from shock to anger to grim resignation. "Are you going to do something about it?" Lisa asked when Maya finished. "Like what?" Sue my neighbors. Have them arrested for wasting police resources? You could, Lisa pointed out. Make an example of them. Maya gazed at the Whitfields' house across the street. Their curtains were drawn, but she could sense they were watching. That's not who I want to be, Lisa. Besides, this isn't about just two people who made a bad judgment call. It's about the assumptions that led to that call. So what will you do? Maya thought for a moment. What I was elected to do. Lead. By Sunday morning, news of the incident had spread throughout Oak Ridge. Maya's phone buzzed constantly with messages of support and outrage from friends, colleagues, and constituents. The local news had picked up the story, though without names or specific details yet. Maya was in her kitchen making coffee when her chief of staff called. The police chief wants to issue a formal apology, he said without preamble. And the press is asking for a statement. How do you want to handle this? Maya leaned against her counter, watching the coffee drip slowly into the pot. Tell the chief I appreciate the gesture, but a better response would be a review of how these calls are handled. As for the press, she paused, considering her options. Schedule a press conference for tomorrow afternoon, and I want to hold a town hall meeting this week. Make it happen. Yes, ma'am. And the neighbors who called? The police report has their names. Keep that information private, Maya said firmly. This isn't about public shaming. It's about addressing a deeper issue. After hanging up, Maya poured her coffee and walked to her front window. A news van was already parked at the end of the street, and she could see a reporter trying to interview neighbors. Most were closing their doors or walking away, but a few stopped to talk. The doorbell rang, startling Maya from her observations. When she opened the door, she found a small package on her doorstep with no sign of who had left it. Inside was a handwritten note, "We're sorry," and a gift card to a local garden center. Maya set the package aside, neither accepting nor rejecting the anonymous apology. It would take more than a gift card to address what had happened, but it was perhaps a start. Throughout the day, Maya prepared for the week ahead, writing notes for her press conference and outlining what she wanted to say at the town hall. This wasn't the first challenge she'd faced as mayor, and it wouldn't be the last. But it was personal in a way the others hadn't been. By evening, she had crafted a response that felt true to herself and her values, one that acknowledged the pain without dwelling in it, that pushed for change without seeking revenge. She would use this moment not to divide her city further, but to bring it together. As she prepared for bed Sunday night, Maya noticed movement across the street. Richard Whitfield was at his mailbox, the first time either of the Whitfields had ventured outside since the incident. Their eyes met briefly across the distance. Richard raised his hand in what might have been a wave, then quickly looked away and hurried back inside. Maya watched him go, wondering what he was thinking, what he was feeling. Shame, regret, fear of consequences, or was he simply embarrassed to have mistaken the mayor for an intruder? Whatever the Whitfields might be feeling, Maya knew her own path forward. She would address this incident not as a victim seeking justice, but as a leader seeking change. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been seen as suspicious, simply for existing in spaces where others thought they didn't belong. She turned away from the window and went to her home office, where her notes for tomorrow's press conference waited. There was still work to be done, words to be carefully chosen. Maya Johnson, the private citizen, might want to scream in frustration or weep in quiet rage, but Mayor Johnson had a different role to play. One that could transform an ugly incident into an opportunity for growth. And in this moment, with her city watching and waiting, Maya chose to be the mayor her community needed. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. Not because it erased the hurt, but because it channeled it toward healing. Tomorrow would be a new day, another chance to build the world she wanted to live in. One conversation, one garden, one neighborhood at a time. Monday morning arrived with a glaring spotlight on Elmwood neighborhood. 3 news vans were parked at the entrance to the cul-de-sac, reporters pacing with coffee cups in hand, waiting for a glimpse of either the mayor or the neighbors who had called the police. The story had spread overnight, fueled by social media and a slow news cycle. Maya watched from her bedroom window, her usual morning routine disrupted by the circus outside. She'd slept poorly, her mind replaying Saturday's events on a loop, imagining different endings, different beginnings. But now, dressed in her most professional navy suit, she was ready to face the day and the cameras. Her phone rang. It was Chief of Police Thomas Bell. "Mayor Johnson, I wanted to speak with you directly before the press conference. The officers involved feel terrible about what happened." "I don't blame the officers, Chief," Maya replied, adjusting her earring as she spoke. They responded to a call and acted professionally once they understood the situation. Still, it's not a good look for the department. "We're already reviewing our protocols for these types of calls." "Good. That's exactly what should happen." Maya paused, then added, "Has anyone from your department released the names of the neighbors who made the call?" "No, ma'am. As requested, that information is being kept confidential." "Thank you. Let's keep it that way." After hanging up, Maya took a deep breath and headed downstairs. Her chief of staff, Ben, was already waiting in her living room, having slipped past the reporters with practiced ease. "Ready for this?" he asked, handing her a folder with talking points for the press conference. Maya nodded, flipping through the pages. "With a few changes." She grabbed a pen from the coffee table and began crossing out lines, adding notes in the margins. Ben watched her work. "You're going soft on them," he observed. "I'm being strategic," Maya corrected him. "This isn't about punishing two people who made a bad decision. It's about changing the environment that made their decision seem reasonable to them. And if it happens again, to someone else who isn't the mayor?" Maya looked up, her eyes sharp. "That's exactly why we focus on systemic change, not individual blame. Because it will happen again if we don't address the root causes." Ben nodded, conceding the point. "The town hall is set for Wednesday evening at the community center. We're expecting a large turnout." "Good. Make sure we have extra seating and security, but keep it low-key. I want people to feel comfortable speaking honestly." As they finished reviewing the schedule, a text came through from Lisa. "The vultures are circling. Need backup?" Maya smiled and replied, "All good. Following the plan. Lunch tomorrow?" At precisely 10 a.m., Maya walked out her front door. The reporters surged forward, calling her name, thrusting microphones in her direction. With practiced calm, she held up a hand. "I'll be holding a press conference at City Hall at 2 p.m. today. I'd appreciate if you would respect my neighbor's privacy until then." "Thank you." She walked to her car, ignoring the shouted questions, and drove away. As she turned the corner, she glimpsed the Whitfields' house, curtains still tightly drawn. They hadn't emerged since yesterday's brief mailbox encounter. City Hall was buzzing when Maya arrived. Staff members offered sympathetic smiles and supportive nods as she made her way to her office. News of the incident had clearly spread through the building, but Maya maintained her composure, thanking people for their concern but deflecting detailed questions. In the privacy of her office, she reviewed her notes once more, making final adjustments to her statement. This press conference would set the tone for everything that followed. Too harsh and she would be labeled angry and divisive. Too soft, and she would be seen as weak, unwilling to stand up for herself and others who faced similar treatment. At 1:55 p.m., Maya stood outside the press room, taking deep breaths. Ben squeezed her shoulder encouragingly. "You've got this," he said. Maya nodded and walked to the podium as cameras flashed and reporters jostled for position. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice steady and clear. "On Saturday morning, I was gardening at my new home in Elmwood when two police officers approached me, responding to a call about a suspicious person on the property. That person was me." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I want to be clear about something. What happened to me on Saturday is not unique or unusual. It happens to people across our city and our country every day. The only unusual aspect is that it happened to someone with a title in front of their name." Maya looked directly into the cameras. "I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm not here to point fingers or name names. The neighbors who called the police made an assumption based on what they saw, or what they thought they saw. And I could stand here and tell you that their assumption was wrong, that it was hurtful, that it was based on unconscious bias. All of that would be true." She took a sip of water. "But instead, I want to talk about how we move forward, how we build a community where such assumptions aren't the first instinct, where neighbors introduce themselves instead of calling authorities, where differences are celebrated rather than suspected." For the next 15 minutes, Maya outlined her vision for community policing reforms, neighborhood integration initiatives, and a citywide conversation about belonging. She announced the upcoming town hall and invited all residents to attend. She spoke with passion but without anger, with determination but without bitterness. What happened Saturday was a teachable moment. For me, for my neighbors, and for our city. I choose to use it as an opportunity for growth rather than division. I hope you'll join me in that choice. As she fielded questions from reporters, Maya maintained her balanced approach, neither minimizing the seriousness of the incident nor exaggerating its implications. When asked if she would press charges against the neighbors who called the police, she shook her head firmly. That would solve nothing and hurt much. I didn't run for mayor to punish people, but to bring them together. That's still my goal, especially now. By the time Maya left City Hall, clips from her press conference were already playing on local news stations. Her phone buzzed with messages from friends, colleagues, and constituents, most supportive, some critical of what they saw as too forgiving an approach. The one message that caught her eye came from an unknown number. "Thank you for your grace today. We don't deserve it." Richard and Diane Whitfield. Maya stared at the message for a long moment before saving the number in her contacts. She didn't reply immediately, unsure of what to say or whether a response was even appropriate at this stage. Instead of going straight home, Maya drove to her parents' house for dinner, a weekly tradition she'd maintained even after becoming mayor. Her mother opened the door before Maya could knock, pulling her into a fierce hug. "We saw the news," her mother said, holding Maya at arm's length to study her face. "Are you really okay?" "I'm fine, Mom," Maya assured her, though the tightness in her chest hadn't fully dissipated. Her father appeared behind her mother, his expression a mixture of pride and concern. "You handled that press conference like a pro. But you shouldn't have to deal with this nonsense in the first place." "No one should," Maya agreed, following them inside. "That's kind of the point." Over her mother's homemade lasagna, Maya shared the details that hadn't made it to the news, how she'd felt in that moment when the police approached, the weight of deciding how to respond, the complexity of living in a neighborhood where some people saw her as an outsider. "Maybe you should move," her mother suggested, not for the first time. "There are plenty of nice houses in better neighborhoods." "Better for who, Mom?" Maya asked gently. "Running away doesn't solve the problem. It just passes it to someone else." Her father nodded slowly. "Your grandfather would have said the same thing. He didn't integrate that factory by giving up when things got uncomfortable." The mention of her grandfather, one of the first black foremen at the city's old manufacturing plant, brought a smile to Maya's face. His stories of persistence in the face of much worse treatment had shaped her approach to adversity from an early age. "The town hall on Wednesday will be tough," Maya admitted. "People are going to be angry on all sides. Some will think I'm not being hard enough on the Whitfields. Others will think I'm making too big a deal of the whole thing." "And what do you think?" her father asked. Maya considered the question. "I think it's not about me anymore. It's about using what happened to make things better for everyone." Later that night, as Maya drove back to her house in Elmwood, she noticed the news vans were gone. The street was quiet, porch lights glowing in the darkness. She parked in her driveway and sat for a moment, looking at her new home with its freshly planted garden. Tomorrow she would respond to the Whitfields' message. Tomorrow she would continue preparing for the town hall. Tomorrow she would take another step in the long journey toward the community she envisioned. But tonight, in this moment of quiet, Maya allowed herself to simply be. Not Mayor Johnson with all its responsibilities, but just Maya, a woman trying to create a home where she could truly belong. 6 months had passed since that Saturday morning when police officers approached Maya in her garden. Elmwood neighborhood looked different now, not in its physical appearance, but in the way its residents moved through their shared spaces. The changes were subtle but significant. More waves across driveways, more conversations at mailboxes, more children playing together on front lawns. Maya stood on her porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the early morning activity. A young couple jogged past, raising their hands in greeting. The retired teacher 3 doors down was walking his golden retriever, pausing to chat with a new family moving in across the street. Ann Dorothy Wilson was making her rounds, a basket of muffins in hand for the newcomers. The neighborhood had transformed, not overnight but gradually, conversation by conversation. The town hall meeting back in April had been the catalyst. 3 hours of difficult, honest dialogue that left everyone emotionally drained but somehow lighter, as if naming the unspoken things had diminished their power. The Whitfields had attended, sitting quietly in the back row. When Mayor Johnson asked for volunteers for the new Neighborhood Connection Committee, Diane Whitfield had raised her hand, her face flushed but determined. It was a small gesture but a beginning. "Morning, Maya," called Howard Wilson, interrupting her thoughts as he crossed the street. "Ready for the big day?" Maya smiled. "As ready as I'll ever be. Dorothy's been baking since dawn, I see." "Hasn't stopped for breath," Howard chuckled. "Says we need at least 5 different kinds of cookies for a proper block party. The first annual Elmwood block party." Maya still couldn't quite believe it was happening, and in her front yard no less. The idea had emerged from the Neighborhood Connection Committee, a regular gathering where residents could simply enjoy each other's company. "No agendas, no formalities, need help setting up the tables?" Howard asked. "That would be wonderful," Maya replied. "They're in the garage. Ben's bringing the sound system around 10. As Howard headed toward the garage, Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Ready for your first hosting gig? Need me to bring anything besides the famous potato salad?" Maya smiled and texted back, "Just yourself. And maybe extra napkins." Inside, Maya checked her to-do list one more time. The city council had approved the street closure permit, the weather forecast promised sunshine, and neighbors had been dropping off folding chairs all week. Everything was in place for a perfect day. Her doorbell rang at precisely 9:30 a.m. Maya opened the door to find Richard and Diane Whitfield standing on her porch, both looking slightly uncomfortable but resolute. "Good morning," Diane said, holding out a large covered dish. "I brought the baked beans you asked for." "Thank you," Maya replied, accepting the dish. "Come in. Howard's just setting up the tables in the backyard if you'd like to help." Richard nodded. Happy to. There was still an awkwardness between them, a careful politeness that hadn't fully relaxed into friendship. But it was a vast improvement over the tension of those first weeks, after the incident. The text message Maya had received, after the press conference had led to a coffee meeting at Neutral Ground, the small cafe downtown. That first conversation had been difficult, full of halting apologies and careful words. Diane had cried, explaining how she'd been raised to be vigilant and protective of her neighborhood. Richard had sat mostly silent, embarrassed and regretful. Maya had listened more than she spoke, understanding that their discomfort was part of the process, a necessary step toward growth. She hadn't offered easy absolution. Instead, she'd suggested they all take time to reflect on how to move forward. The Whitfields had taken that suggestion seriously. They'd attended every community dialogue session. They'd joined the neighborhood watch with a new perspective on what suspicious activity really meant. They'd made awkward but genuine efforts to get to know their other neighbors of color. Now, watching Richard help Howard arrange tables in her backyard, Maya felt a quiet satisfaction. Not because the Whitfields had been reformed, people were more complex than that, but because they had chosen to do the uncomfortable work of examining their assumptions. By noon, Maya's front yard and driveway had transformed into party central. Folding tables lined the edges, laden with potluck offerings from throughout the neighborhood. Children darted between adults, faces painted by the teenager who'd set up an art station under the oak tree. The fire department had brought a truck for the kids to explore, and the police chief himself was serving lemonade, a subtle but intentional gesture of community engagement. "Quite a turnout," Lisa commented, appearing at Maya's side with a fresh glass of iced tea for her friend. "Hard to believe this is the same neighborhood where you were almost arrested for gardening 6 months ago." Maya smiled. Watching a group of children, black, white, Asian, Latino, playing an impromptu game of tag across several front yards. "Not almost arrested, just questioned. Semantics," Lisa replied with a raised eyebrow. "But I take your point. This is pretty amazing what you've done here." "What we've all done," Maya corrected her. "Change doesn't happen because of one person." As the afternoon progressed, Maya moved through the crowd, chatting with neighbors, thanking volunteers, making introductions between people who still hadn't met. Her role as mayor often took a back seat to her role as neighbor today, though many residents from other parts of the city had stopped by to show support for the community initiative. Around 3 o'clock, Ben clinked a glass to get everyone's attention. "Mayor Johnson would like to say a few words," he announced. Maya hadn't planned a speech, but as she looked around at the diverse faces watching her expectantly, words came naturally. "Thank you all for coming today," she began, her voice warm. "When I moved to Elmwood last spring, I didn't know what to expect. I was just looking for a home a place to plant flowers, drink coffee on the porch, and maybe chat with neighbors about the weather. A knowing chuckle rippled through the crowd. What I found instead was an opportunity to build something meaningful together, to have hard conversations, to grow beyond our comfort zones. She glanced briefly at the Whitfields, who stood quietly near the dessert table. 6 months ago, an unfortunate incident could have divided this neighborhood. Instead, you all chose a different path. You showed up to community dialogues. You volunteered for committees. You opened your minds and, more importantly, your front doors. Maya gestured to the scene around them. Children playing, adults talking, food being shared. This is what community looks like. Not perfect, not without history or hurts, but willing to do the work of belonging to each other. Thank you for that gift. As applause broke out, Dorothy Wilson stepped forward with a small wrapped package. We have something for you, Maya, she said, from all of us. Maya unwrapped the gift to find a beautiful ceramic plaque designed to go in her garden. It read, "In this home, in this community, all are welcome." Fighting back unexpected tears, Maya thanked everyone again. The party continued around her, conversations flowing, children laughing, music playing. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Real life seldom provided those, but it was progress, tangible and true. Later, as the sun began to set and neighbors helped clean up, Diane Whitfield approached Maya as she was folding a tablecloth. "I wanted to thank you," Diane said quietly. "For hosting." "It was my pleasure," Maya replied. Diane shook her head. "Not just for today, for not making us the villains of the story. You could have. You had every right to. Instead, you gave us a chance to be part of the solution." Maya considered her words carefully. "We all have moments we're not proud of, Diane. What matters is what we do after those moments." "Still," Diane persisted, "not everyone would have handled it the way you did. My sister in Cleveland says I should count myself lucky you didn't sue us or go to the media with our names." "That wouldn't have helped anyone," Maya said simply, "least of all me." They worked side by side for a few minutes, gathering stray napkins and cups. The awkwardness between them hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had softened into something more like mutual respect. "Will you do this again next year?" Diane asked as they carried the last of the folding chairs to Howard's truck. "I hope so," Maya replied. "Maybe we could make it a quarterly event? Different yards each time?" "I'd like that," Diane said. "And perhaps we could host the next one? At our place?" The offer hung in the air between them. Not quite an apology, not quite forgiveness, but something else. A step forward, Maya nodded. "I think that's a wonderful idea." As the last neighbors departed and the street returned to its usual quiet, Maya sat alone on her front steps, looking at the garden where it all began. The flowers she'd planted that fateful Saturday had bloomed and faded with the seasons, but new growth had replaced them, stronger and more varied than before. Like the neighborhood itself, the garden had evolved. It wasn't perfect. There were still bare patches and occasional weeds, but it was alive and thriving, a work in progress. Maya smiled to herself. Wasn't that the point of being a mayor? Of being a neighbor? Of being human? Not to achieve perfection, but to keep planting, keep tending, keep believing in the possibility of growth. She stood up and went inside, already making mental notes for the next community gathering. There was still work to be done, but today had shown how far they'd come, and in this moment that was enough.